Good afternoon and welcome to our study of the Buddhist psychology of awakening by Steven Goodman. And there's a lot to be said about this. Essentially, we're doing this to establish an awareness of our given conditions. And in the Buddhist teaching, we see the primary creator of our reality as being mind, consciousness. And so with us working with consciousness, we are eliminating the confusion that prevents us from properly inhabiting and understanding our reality or the reality. What obscures us is a fundamental misapprehension of reality. What we call ignorance is not really that we don't know the mantra or we don't know the right, equation or whatever. It's simply just a cognitive dysfunction that fails to recognize awareness as an open dimension and rather solidifies this into a sense of I. And on the basis of that, then solidifies what is the perceived field as other. This is a delusional condition which really prompts this situation that we call samsara. And it's from there that we then solidify our sense of person and solidify the field as a sense of realm or world. And so from the Buddhist perspective, on the basis of simply just looking at what is the primary ground of all experience, namely the mind, this is what the Buddha understood in terms of our situation, that there's this cognitive dysfunction that constructs a delusional experience that we call samsara. However, the Buddha saw that this is a delusional condition that is workable. And so all the teaching that the Buddha gave was really aimed at enabling others to simply awaken from this delusional condition. In this sense, the Buddha is not a creator or not a prophet, but simply somebody who was enlightened, who saw clearly where this cognitive dysfunction was discontinued and the natural abiding quality of who we all are became fully manifest, blossomed. This is what then, this is why we call the Buddha the awakened one or the enlightened one. So that's where we then have the Buddhist teaching continually operating with a path that really aims at clarifying this confused condition. And we do that above all with identifying where it is that we perpetuate this experience that obscures us, which is essentially this sense of self. And based on sense of self, the projection of other. And we've looked at that here in the Abhidharma. And you can say the Abhidharma is the science of Buddhism that enables us to begin to get a grip on our experience. We're not talking about something that's abstract, metaphysical, but we're talking about something that is empirical. It's something that is not tied up in some assumptions or beliefs, but is about what we can verify. So in that sense, we could say Buddhism qualifies as science as we would define it nowadays, but it's a science that doesn't look at the material, but it's a science that looks at the place from which all knowledge really originates, which is the mind. All our perceptions really operate within this sphere of the mind and the mind's relationship to object. And this is what we've covered in the discussion around dhatus, around the perception of object, the faculty and the consciousness that's generated in conjunction of the meeting between the faculty and the object, say the I, and the object, which then generates visual consciousness. So we've sort of mapped that, and now we're looking at then the subjective experiences, what we call mental factors. And that's where we've presently we've covered what we call wholesome mental factors, which are the factors that really lead us into a more valid experience of reality. We call these wholesome factors. And that, you could say, is somewhat value laden in the sense that we might say, oh, but who is to decide what's wholesome and not? And from a Buddhist perspective, that's true. We don't really have any of that. So in some way, you could say there's not really a sort of an absolute, but we do, however, identify how there are certain mental factors that enable us to see more or less clearly. And wholesome mental factors, they provide a condition not just for happiness, which of course also is part of, you could say, attuning ourselves to reality, but also simply in seeing in a less confused, afflicted way. So that's where we've studied the wholesome mental factors. We completed that last time, and now we're going to be looking at unwholesome mental factors, the things that trip us up, and the things that we obviously deal with, and they're it's very helpful to actually be aware of these, to give them a label, to give them a name, know where they live, have their phone number, and sort of in general just sort of be able to track them down and make sure they don't come and wreak havoc. So that's where we now presently are looking at the wholesome mental factors. And by the way, you're looking at Mount Fuji in Japan, which so beautiful, isn't it? Okay. And while we're studying, we can do that together with the late Kangyur Rinpoche, Longchen Yeshe Dorje, a great master whose, well, we could say enlightened aspirations really were significant in terms of benefiting Buddha Dharma in the West. Kangyur Rinpoche never traveled to the West, but he had Western students, and he aspired that, made prayers really that the Buddha that the Buddha Dharma could take root in the West. And so he passed away in early 1975. But his wife and his children traveled and immigrated to France, and in a very sort of quiet, unassuming way, established the Buddhist teaching really there, with retreat centers and study centers. The Padmakara Translation Committee works from there, and so forth. Really had, so Kangyur Rinpoche's, you could say, bodhicitta really had an incredible, has an incredible impact really on Buddhism in the modern world. So this is, I'm assuming this picture was taken by Matthew Ricard, and this would have been in the early 1970s, I guess. Anyway, so factors. So Steven writes, now we will look at the primary factors of upset and their relation to the secondary factors of upset. So upset here means affliction, kleshas, what drives our toxicity. So Steven says, first, however, it's important to say something about the use of the term upset. Sometimes people refer to these factors simply as varieties of emotional upset. But for instance, it's not clear that belief, number 6 in the list of primary factors, and I apologize, I have a list of the primary factors. The secondary factors are there's 20 of them, so I can't actually cut and paste the way I normally do with these. I'm gonna have to actually type it out in a Word doc, which I'll get around to by next time. But anyway, so we have the primary factors of upset, and then secondary, of which there are 20. So here we have, among the primary factors, we have number 6, which is translated as belief, but we're talking about, we have the alternative term, the opinionatedness, And that's where you could say it also comes with a particular quality of rigidity. So that's where we can't really just refer to them as in terms of kleshas or in terms of destructive emotions. They are something like belief is perhaps destructive, but it's more sort of destructive in the sense of causing affliction. So Stephen continues, I use the word upset for the Sanskrit word klesha because it indicates something is a bit out of balance. Also, it avoids the problematic term emotion or emotional. We might say that there are both mental and emotional aspects of upset. So he says there are 6 primary factors of upset and a list of 20 secondary factors of upset. What is the relationship between the primary and secondary factors? The primary factors are rather like parents, whereas the secondary factors are like their children. They come from or are rooted in those primary factors. Anger and its secondary factors. So as an example, he says, let's give an example. Factor number 2, anger. Okay, here we have factor number 2, anger. Yeah, which then he says has its children, its progeny, secondary factors numbered 1, fury or indignation, 2, resentment, 4, spite, and 10, malice. So this is from the list of secondary factors. We might say these children are experientially accessible, living factors of upset. The primary factors then are more like tendencies or basic orientations. For example, when the factor of anger is being expressed actually and concretely in our lives, this energy of aggression tends towards rather different and specific forms. One of them is number 1, fury or indignation. Can we relate to that in our lives? Is it present when we feel, how dare you? How could you? Things were so perfect and then you or someone spoiled it. So we can probably all relate to that situation in being indignant. So Stephen says that is the energy of indignation. It's very precise. It is related to and rooted in anger as the parent. You can say anger is that basically displeasure, not wanting, aversion, adverse to what's happening. And that is then, in this case, then our indignation that somebody is the cause of something we don't like. So anger is then the parent, and in this case, then we have the child indignation. He says, in that moment, when we have to deal with this out of control child of upset called indignation, we forget who the parents are. If we're very clever, we might want to call the parents and say, you need to control your child. This is an example to help us understand the relation between the primary and secondary factors. Secondary here means the child of, and every child has parents who give birth to them. So basically, when we talk about the causes of our suffering and samsara and so on, we generally just talk about 3 basic kleshas, which are anger and desire and then ignorance. And then we say aversion, attachment, and ignorance. And we can see aversion is just simply all that comes with that whole thing of no, not happy. And attachment or aversion is like, want that. And so it's very, you could say, binary and very basic, but it's also very, very precise in terms of our experience. But it does have these more subtle, or you could say experiential aspects that come with, for example, indignation or fury or spite or resentment, and these kind of qualities that all have to do with displeasure, but then again have their own particular flavor. Indignation is one thing, spite is another one, resentment that sits there and sort of simmers and waits till we get the chance to pounce and retaliate. These all have their own particular flavors. So they are justifiably identified as secondary mental factors. But again, we could, understand all of this in terms of these basic three kleshas: attachment, aversion, and ignorance. So basically now here we're just mapping these experiences. Another child of arrogance or anger is resentment. The great German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche wrote about the importance of resentment. Now, I was trying to follow up what he says more about the importance of resentment, as if it had sort of some important constructive role, but we are kind of left a little bit intrigued what it was that Nietzsche wrote about. Anyway, Steven says, even within technical Western philosophical literature, this factor of resentment coming from repression is a wide and pervasively observed phenomenon. Sometimes we feel resentment and we're just waiting for something to confirm our being justified in this resentment. So-and-so did me wrong, don't you think? Yes, yes, then we're friends. You agree with me in my cause. Then Steven says it comes out and we express it. Yeah, this is so wrong, etc., etc. Often there is a time lag. This factor of waiting is largely unconscious. There has been a repression. There have been previous acts of unkindness and aggression that have pushed down the energy. It's just waiting as if under pressure. And then the slightest little thing can set us off. Both indignation, how dare someone, and a sense of resentment, this was done to me, are concrete expressions of the energy called anger. Number 4, spite, in the list of secondary factors, is also associated with that parent, anger. Spite means we're enjoying inflicting pain on others. Spite or malice is intending to make someone feel bad. So there's somebody that we really don't like, and if we could make them feel bad, we would have satisfaction. So that's where we, again, dislike, and then we have a particular style of dislike that plays out in this way. Anger, the parent, expresses itself through its children. It flows sometimes in the form of wanting to harm, sometimes in the form of taking pleasure, and sometimes in the form of outrage. We begin to see the children of that angry parent. Again, this is really valuable because the more that we objectify these, they're no longer just sitting under, you could say, under the skin or like an undertow, like in a marsh. We sometimes think we have a solid ground, then we walk into a marsh and we just sink in. And that's where we're deceived by the sort of the appearance of solidity. And here what we very often have with our emotions is that they're just there and we just take them for granted as if they represent our sanity, as if they represent our particular character, or this is, who we are and all of that. And we actually don't really look at what are all the conditions that are there and don't really actually label and identify them. And this is what we're then doing with this analysis of mental factors, is we're becoming aware of all these little elements that sit there, and they are nothing but elements that sit in various places that we allow to just unconsciously rule us. At the same time, this is not the kind of unconscious domain that can't be known. It's really just a question of turning around and looking and seeing what it is that's actually ruling us. And it's when we do that that we begin to actually take control. This is, again, I think Steven mentioned this in the early part, but there's a really great image of what it means to actually get to the bottom of the neurosis that controls us. And it's a bit like what we very often do is when we're controlled by neurosis, we're sort of onto the object. And then we're just sort of like, this is so bad, and this is really, I have to have that, or whatever. And we're just blindly propelled by these sort of impulses. But what we're doing here is actually not looking at the object that our impulses are driving us towards. We're trying to look at the impulse itself and see this is actually what is causing our pain. It's not that we go for an object and then we can keep it and we're happy, or we lose it and we're sad or whatever. It's actually looking at the place where this whole thing originates, and that's actually where the pain comes from. And it's getting to that, and that's why we have this beautiful image that comes from India, where it says, if you throw a stone at a dog, then the dog will stand there and bark at the stone. If you throw a stone at a lion, the lion is not going to give a damn about the stone. The lion is just going to turn around and look who threw that stone. that's the lion sort of gets to the bottom of the issue, and that's where we need to be like the lion. We need to be willing to look at what really is that drives our annoyance, our pain, our dissatisfaction, and not be fooled by sort of the external object when we go, how dare you, or this or that, and so on, this person, that person. But rather we need to, like the lion, turn around and look at the real place where the pain is coming from. And it doesn't lie in the object, it lies in the subject. So that's here then where we're looking at the parents and the children of these delusional practices that these unwholesome mental factors really constitute. So Steven says, we'll need to go into some of the details of these really interesting factors. They may even seem to be more interesting than the wholesome factors. This is interesting. We kind of always think it's, you'd rather watch The Shining than Annie Green Gables and stuff like that. So we maybe this is because Steven says it's a bit easier to identify them in our everyday life. One of the things we might discover is that what we call our energy of spaciousness, our basic sanity, is hidden or obscured by our habits of upset. So our sanity is our basic ground and our strength, but it's been obscured by these habitual patterns on how we react to things. So Steven says the biggest habit of upset, which doesn't even seem to be an emotion, is the primary factor number 6, belief. We have a lot of opinions, a lot of beliefs. We think this actually corresponds to the way things are. So we might think, oh yeah, the people over there, this is how they are, or so-and-so is like this, or I am like this. And these are just beliefs. They're just ideas that we fixate on, and we basically hold on to them as being sacred to our personal outlook on things. So that's where it has nothing to do with the nature of things, but it's just the way that we sustain this attitude on the basis of belief or opinion. We think, this is obvious, the delusion, we think that this actually corresponds to the way things are. So-and-so is in a particular way. This person or that group, or this, this object of one kind or another, this work of art, this creation or structure or whatever it might be. This entirely consists of just opinions. See if there's some questions. Annie of Green Gables is really a fantastic book. I agree. And when nobody's looking, I would rather be seeing Annie Green Gables than The Shining, actually, for sure. So we're on the same page. Absolutely. Yes. I've only seen it once, but I want to see it again, I think. Okay. So attachment and its secondary factors. We gave the example of anger, and I will now give another example. The very first primary factor on this list is attachment. Let's see. Indeed, it is raga. Cupidity, attachment. Okay. Attachment is a rather broad thing. We do not go around saying, I'm attached. I wish I was not attached. We have rather concrete experiences, and it's interesting to see which children of this parent upset, are actually running around. That is to say, which ones of my actual experiences of upset belong to the family of attachment. The main work here is to see who these children are, because they correspond rather closely to what we would call having an upset. it seems that there are at least 20 ways in which we can be upset, 20 basic energy packets of upset. This list seems to cover a great deal of what I experienced in my life. It goes a long way in helping me identify the many forms of upset which are common occurrences. It allows me to expand my vocabulary. I do not just say I'm miserable or I'm upset. I have 20 different ways to sing that song. That's right. This has happened to me. This didn't work out, etc., etc. And then others are supposed to pitch in and go, yeah, that's really terrible, and so on. In fact, all we're talking about is just aversion. Or we're like, look at my new whatever, look at this. Wow, about that. And people are supposed to go, ooh and ah, and so on. And we have all these kind of ways of just essentially operating on the basis of these fundamentally, you could say, deluded, perfectly human, perfectly normal, but also the very causes of suffering. And this is the delusional projections of solidity that we attribute, that we label object, and it solidifies also the labeler, the subject. So that's where we do talk of these in terms of, you could say, delusion, in terms of mental factors that obscure, but we very often, the problem is we fail to really understand this is something that's obscuring us and actually has nothing to do with the price of eggs. It has nothing to do with what is there. So Steven says, for instance, with respect to the primary upset called attachment, it might be helpful to know who the children are. Let's think concretely in terms of energy. The energy of attachment and being fascinated or involved in attachment flows in many different ways. There are 9 different children associated with the parent attachment. These 9 secondary factors of upset are being stingy or having avarice or parsimony. 6. This is number 6, sorry. And then number 7, being pretentious or deceitful. Being dishonest or hypocritical, 8. Being a bit self-infatuated or inflated, 9. Having a lack of conscience or being shameless, 11. Having a lack of propriety, 12. Being lethargic or gloomy, 13. Being a bit overexcited or ebullient, 14. Being a bit desultory or distractible or just being distracted, 20. So these all have to do with, they basically come out of a situation of us wanting and grasping onto something. All of these sort of are recognizable, you could say, consequences of attachment. So how emotional upset occurs? These lists of primary and secondary factors of upset provide a rich source for what one might call an experiential phenomenology of upset. And of course, this is all phenomenology. This is all something that we can identify. And in this case, we can talk about phenomenology as being empirical, because it's not about something where we're talking about something that we can't immediately experience. We're not talking about something that's vague or that we've just decided to assume is there. It's very much operating within a verifiable experiential dimension. So this is something that we can work with on a very real level. And so what we're doing here, it is then, like Steven said, that is a study of the phenomena of how emotional upset occurs, both in its overt expression, 20 secondary factors, and also in the predispositions that set us up towards such expression, the prior conditioning, the 6 primary factors. For example, how is it that when this primary factor called attachment is rather active, any of its children may come out and play? So how is that? In the context we're now exploring, the term emotion or emotional upset corresponds more precisely to the list of secondary unwholesome factors, the so-called children, whose parents are the primary factors of upset. Furthermore, if we look at the 6 factors listed as primary, attachment, anger, arrogance, ignorance, doubt, and belief, 3 of them, ignorance, doubt, and belief, might not seem like upsets to us. Whether primary or secondary, however, all of them have in common the potential movement of a disturbing energy. So 3 of these, they're well known: attachment, anger, and ignorance. But ignorance, along with doubt and belief, is actually seen as more of a cognitive condition that's not really tainted with what we normally understand as emotion. But nevertheless, they actually constitute delusional practices and delusional stances that perpetuate suffering. So he says we might not be disturbed by ignorance or doubt, and certainly my beliefs do not disturb me, right? But because my beliefs, by the way, they're right. So that's why I'm very, very picky about anybody who challenges my beliefs. Woe is them who might. Anyway, but belief here means you believe this is me. This is the energy that works in the background and impedes and upsets our ability to walk on the path to full and complete liberation. So that's where this is what the Buddhist text suggests. So of course, this is where there's always this underlying sense of me. And I'd like to be confirmed. I'm a bit sort of wary that there are things that might upset or threaten my existence or what I identify with. And I'm continually sort of worried or nervous about that. And this is continually the insecurity that comes with basically ego, ignorance. Another more contemporary way to think about these primary and secondary factors is that they indicate there is a disturbance in the force. It's as if there is some kind of Star Wars going on. The Buddhist version of this war, however, would be to suggest that sometimes there is no disturbance in the force. And that is the good news. The positive factors we were talking about previously help the disturbance in the force to settle down and make possible a clearing, a way in which we can actually see how to proceed. We might say then that the big difference between the positive factors and the factors of upset has to do with this force, our basic sanity, our Buddha nature. So even though we might not presently feel upset, there is still a stirring, an imbalance, a lingering energy of potential upset, right? It may be repressed, it may be from the past, but it's there. We'll give a brief definition of the 6 primary factors before launching into the fun part. Those 20 secondary factors. So essentially here, also when we're talking about the imbalance in the force, it's just the pebble in the shoe or the basic discomfort of just our existence, the basic sense of insecurity. And this is essentially when one way that we have that discomfort is because presently in the condition of delusion, in our deluded, confused state, we actually have a health or something. There's a rash that breaks out, which is our suffering, which is really indicative of our sanity, our Buddha nature. In a healthy organism, when we ingest, for example, unhealthy food, we break out in a rash. There's a reaction. An unhealthy organism, actually, you eat junk food and you're perfectly fine. That's rather worrying. It's a lot better when you have a system that immediately reacts. So the fact that we suffer, there we are in delusion, and we actually suffer as a consequence. We have this Weltschmerz, or this existential angst that sort of lingers, our insecurity. And if we're honest enough and sensitive enough, we know that it's there. Something needs to be done. There is an issue. And that is what propels us then to do something. And that's what brings us to the path, so to speak. So that's where there is this, although it's not particularly manifest, then in those that are sufficiently sensitive, there is this lingering, like Steven says, a lingering energy of potential upset. We're sort of always sort of poised to sort of react in neurotic ways. And it's sort of just, it actually constitutes a basic disposition of dissatisfaction. Okay, so we have this primary factors of upset here. These are, again, like you've seen, they are attachment or cupidity attachment, anger, arrogance, ignorance or lack of awareness, avidya, maripa, doubt, tetsum, or indecision, and then dishti, opinionatedness, which I think in the Tibetan actually is tawa, but I'll have to check that, which means view. It's just our belief, where we get quite rigid about things. And sometimes also we almost feel obliged to stay with our belief. We have this strange loyalty to our sort of our stance. This is what I stand for, you know. I'm a liberal, or I'm Labor, or I'm a greenie, or I'm whatever I might be. There's a sort of this is I stand for, you know, this, that, and the other. And we're married to that sometimes. Just yesterday, I just remembered something. There was this famous Danish politician who got elected. He was very much opposed to this one particular party, and so he was elected because he really took a distance from that party. But once he got into power, it was a little bit of a shaky situation. So he had to go into a coalition with a party that he actually that sort of made a big number about how he didn't like that party. And then they sort of joined in a happy marriage of a coalition, and then they ruled. And people would say, didn't you dislike that party? And he just said, well, you know, you have an opinion until you take a new one, which was an admirable flexibility, right? Except, of course, it was read as being rather opportunistic. So that's where the reality of it is. And of course, what he was just being a sort of a realistic politician. And the reality is, yes, we actually should let go of our rigidity, because very often it's flawed. It's based on some invalid perceptions. So it's actually sometimes a really good exercise to say, I was wrong, or, you know, to basically be willing to investigate the validity of our assumptions or opinions. I apologize if I'm stating the obvious, but anyway, our project here is to be aware of these 6 factors, and you'll be, I tell you, as you practice, you will find these very, very helpful, this way of classifying and understanding what's happening in our mind. So it's not just that we're embracing some sort of, you could say, a psychological formula that was hatched in India a long time ago, and that we might think, oh, but that's no longer valid. It comes from an entirely different perspective. And we should really give this particular approach really the benefit of the doubt, even though it's perhaps different from how we understand psychology in the ordinary sense. We should also take into account that it really comes with a vastly different scope. So anyway, attachment. The first of the 6 primary factors of upset, raga, Tibetan would be chakpa, is translated as attachment. It is the energy that makes us run after anything in the 3 levels of samsara. The first level is the desire realm. Each of the 6 forms of life, each of the 6 life forms, the hell beings, the hungry ghosts, animals, humans, titans, or quarreling beings, and so-called divine ones, gods, is part of the desire realm, because they each have a primary factor of upset that motivates them. Hell beings are primarily motivated by anger. Pretas, hungry ghosts, are primarily motivated by being stingy or avaricious. And animals are primarily motivated by being ignorant, or rather clueless, having dangerous confusion. The so-called human realm is dominated by a fickle and changeable fascination. By the way, this is why advertising works so well with humans. We're always wanting something new or better. The so-called titans, the quarreling ones, would-be gods, are dominated by jealousy, and the so-called gods are primarily motivated by pride or ignorance. So these six primary factors, they sort of permeate these three realms. Now, when we, by the way, talk about the desire realm, actually here it talks about the three levels of samsara. So far, we've only actually covered the desire realm. What we then call the realm of form are more subtle spiritual dimensions, and formless are even more subtle and spiritual dimensions. Anyway, let's see, we'll discuss them. So whenever any of these factors of upset is primary, we are in that realm of desire. If we're dominated by anger, everything is hellish. And this is where, when we're dominated by anger, everything just bothers us. There's so many things that are not okay. It's not just that we say, I'm angry, but we're saying, this happens to me, so-and-so, this circumstance out there. And so we have very much an experience of the outer world against us. And that's really where we then talk about hell as being a place in which the environment is aggressing on us. And that's where we talk about here, Steven says, everything is hellish. And our experience for that period of time is called a hell being. The thing about the hells is that they have this self-perpetuating tendency in that the external environment provokes more sense of upset and more sense of anger. So that's where we're continually, increasingly perpetuating this experience. Doesn't mean that hells last forever, but they tend to have this quality of, unfortunately, be rather self-perpetuating until, you could say, eventually somehow the conditions are exhausted or something takes us out of there. So Steven says, it is as if to say who we are is what we're thinking, and how we think is where we are. So it's a bit like in macrobiotics, they say, you are what you eat. So we are basically the product of what we think, and it's our thinking that basically constitutes our experience of the world. The Abhidharma gives us a clue, Steven says, which helps break down a solid idea of self that is separate from the world. Who we are, where we are, and what we're doing are all the same thing, asked in different ways. You can even make a practice out of this. Who we are is where we are. Who we are and what we're doing. Who we are is what we're doing. Where are we? What are we doing? There is no escape. It is a rather sly game. It's not the way we think. It is not the way we think. We think, I am this way, and I just happen to be doing that. But according to this scheme, if we are angry, we're hell beings. If we're arrogant, we're so-called gods, etc. These six realms are not at all some mythological locations that exist apart from exactly the precision of our own mental processes. Attachment is running after things dominated by these primary factors of upset, and that is called the desire realm. So we can see there's a very intimate relationship between the subject and the object. This is a little bit different from what we call realism or scientific realism, where we actually think that the external object is apart from the subject. So this is also basic to the whole idea of materialism, really, in which we're just seeing not just as the external phenomena, sort of an external object, but even the mind itself is also just seen as something that's constituted by material conditioning. So that's where the outlook that we've ordinarily been brought up with, which very often is scientific realism or materialism, is this notion that there's a world external to us. And in Buddhism, we're not saying that there's not as if there isn't an external world, but it is our perception of it is so much tied up, and the way that we construct the world is entirely tied up with our perceiving subject. So attachment, so the six realms is not at all some mythological location that exists apart from exactly the precision of our own mental processes. So when we talk about realms in the Buddhist world, it's not going to help us to try and look, well, can we locate them in particular locations, even though sometimes in traditional scriptures, you'll see, okay, the hell realms, they're located, 20,000 leagues under the ground or whatever. There are some references in that sense, but that has more to do really with aligning with cultural conventions for, you could say, the geography. And certainly within the Buddhist context, we would essentially say that realms is constructed by the perceiving mind. So Steven says attachment is running after things dominated by these primary factors of upset. And this is called the desire realm. Okay. Can you please further explain? Attachment is running after the things dominated by the primary factors of upset. Is this attachment the same as the poison attachment? No, actually here, if you noticed here, we're more identifying the realm of desire in terms of these six primary factors. So we're actually seeing this discussion here is really really takes into account all six as being basic to the experience of the desire realm. Yeah. So the second level of samsara involves running after the realm of form, which means meditative experiences. And the third level of samsara runs running after experiences of the formless realm, which means extremely subtle meditative experiences. We can say that the realm of form is where there still is a relationship to form as such, but from the perspective of greater insight. And so this is really the place where, and we would say the higher realms of samsara are characterized by an understanding of cause and effect. And so those who understand cause and effect will naturally create conditions for happiness. And that's where we have we then have realms that are called the realm of form, where individuals really are those who understand cause and effect and have focused on simply just creating the causes of happiness. And this, of course, also has a lot to do with the notion of religions, where you very often have ethical guidelines or moral compass that provides a way to be reborn in then what is thought of as heaven. And so that's the realm of form. The formless realm is then the wisdom traditions, where, or rather those who have the insight that then understand the subtle aspect of the mind and simply just settling into samadhi or meditative conditions, they then engage in experiences in a realm that has not any particular reference to form as such. And that's then where we talk about the samadhis that are experienced by great spiritual individuals or gods or whatever. All these three types of experience constitute samsara, whether focused on desire, form, or formless modes. And all such experiences are temporary. They won't last. So this also applies then to the formless. So just entering into a samadhi, as long as there's still a notion of self, then even though there's no particular form that one is relating to, there's still the seed of samsara is still unchallenged. And there's simply just remaining in a blissful condition. This has nothing to do with enlightenment as such. This then, Steven says, is the range of that primary factor called attachment. We are attached to and run after or driven by charged situations and meditative experiences that account for our whole life. Now, 2, anger. Factor number 2 is anger. Anger here means, as we explored previously, to have a vindictive attitude towards sentient beings we do not like, towards frustration, and toward whatever might cause our frustration. We do not like frustration. We want to reject and push away frustration, or rather cause. Insofar as other people may be the source of frustration, we want to push them away too. We have a very low capacity for accepting or being present with frustration. The frustration of anger, now that we know something about how it is defined, is that it serves as a basis for our finding fault with almost anything that occurs in our life. And it blocks us from having any concrete experience of happiness. So we are continually involved with this rejection. So that's anger. Again, something that everything we're talking about here, we know so well. And before we talked about perhaps the meditative realms of the gods, that's maybe not something we ordinarily experience, but everything else, it is so real. There's nothing of this that actually has anything to do with something on a spiritual plane. That's maybe sometimes also you have spiritual movements where you just don't talk about these things. They're like, ooh, we'd like to talk about the love and the light and all of that, and we should just be above anger. We should be above attachment. We should be above all these things. And that's a rather sad moralistic sort of imperative that really leaves us in a bit of a hard spot, because we're bound to still have these. And so then if we're sort of aspiring to be lovely and light and all of that, and nevertheless we still have anger, we still get frustrated, we're still resentful, it's rather embarrassing. So that's where you sort of leave them at the door when we sort of join the crowd of the loving lighties, and we haven't really related to the actual cause of our suffering. So that's where it's really important that we're not sort of just engaging in this thing that also is known as spiritual bypass, that we're sort of just that we just like to think of ourselves in terms of what we imagine would be the spiritual and the pure and so on, and we don't actually relate to the dirty laundry that's piling up. And the beauty of this dirty laundry is that it's absolutely washable. It's absolutely something we can do something about. So it doesn't really constitute a problem. It really only constitutes a problem the moment that we're not clear on it. So desire, anger, and now 3, arrogance. The third factor, pratiga, is translated as arrogance. Arrogance is defined as the quality of having a mind that's a bit inflated, self-absorbed. This factor serves as a basis for the arising of disrespect. We think we know what is going on, so we disrespect and we don't pay attention to what does not correspond to what we think is going on. That is a sense of arrogance. We do not necessarily go around saying, I'm arrogant. We say, I know, meaning I know better. We say, people ought to listen to me because I'm very insightful and I know things and I know best. And so Stephen continues, we disregard what does not correspond to what we say we know. We disregard what does not correspond to what we say we know. So when there's something that inconveniently doesn't really gel with what we think is how things are, then we like to disregard it. So it really becomes a condition of ignorance. It also serves as a basis for frustration when what is actually going on does not correspond to my inflated sense of what should be going on. So this is further sort of aggravating. This primary factor has a full treatment in Buddhist literature. The mind in Buddhist psychology lists 7 kinds of arrogance. There's arrogance, there's excessive arrogance, there's pride in having excessive arrogance, arrogance which has the habit of reflecting me, and the arrogance of showing off, and the arrogance of dismissing or thinking small or demeaning things. And finally, 7, the arrogance that is completely perverted, the arrogance that completely turns away from what is actually true. So again, these are all things that hopefully, if we, this is where again we're mapping our confusion. Beauty of the Buddhist teaching is it doesn't just map enlightenment, but it also maps very clearly how our confusion plays out. And so here, of course, we're talking about causes of our suffering and our confusion, but it's all things that take place within our own disposition. So again, it's something that we all are familiar with. We could perhaps, with a sense of humor, sort of ponder all of these 7 and sort of say, yeah, I actually probably have practiced these various kinds of arrogance in one way or another. But that is quite important. We can't just think it's the others that have it, not me. That's question. When one does not pay attention due to distractedness, can this be one form of arrogance, ego? Well, if it's distraction, then there's what we actually say about distraction is, in the Tibetan or in Dharma language, we call it lumaten. So once we're distracted, it means we're in a place which lumaten actually means neutral or undecided. It's like anything could happen. So we might actually, you could say, be arrogantly holding on to our practice of distraction and so on, but distraction in itself is really just an open space where anything could happen. That's the problem with distraction. It's a cognitive quality that really just could take us anywhere. So when we're distracted, we could be good, we could be bad. There's no saying. It's basically a condition of ignorance. So that's the problem with distraction. Also, as practitioners of meditation, then we would know this is really sort of the big problem, really. It's our lack of mindfulness, because anything could take place from that place. But we could, yes, I mean, we could understand mindlessness or distraction as something that we might be somewhat prone to, or maybe even opt for, and that we could say it's arrogant, but it's not really necessarily associated with arrogance. Okay. Okay. The 4th factor, avidya or marikpa, is translated as ignorance or lack of awareness. Vidya means knowledge. Schools, or sometimes in Indonesia and also in India and other places, is known as Vidyalaya. And it really just means the place of knowledge, the ground of knowledge. And you talk about Vidyadhara, or in the case of American Buddhism, Vijayadhara. And that's where Chögyam Trungpa, for example, would be have the honorary title of the Vijayadhara, someone who possesses knowledge. So the lack of that is, of course, what we then term ignorance. Steven says this is the most pervasive of all factors of upset. Ignorance is the most basic root cause of all suffering. So that's number 4. Okay, well, next time we'll start with number 5. Any questions? You're welcome. Okay, we'll dedicate. By this merit, may all attain omniscience. May defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may all beings be freed. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish, ever more and more. So there's just one last question here. Is arrogance associated with self-debasement, sense of inferiority? Thanks. Well, we could link the two together undoubtedly. In that case, then we could say these would be, you could say, the children. Well, not necessarily, because your question comes from a place of actually looking at the cause, isn't it? So you might say that arrogance is something that comes from a greater sense of self-abasement, sense of inferiority. Look, there's not anything particularly stated about this in the present context, but of course, if we were to look at where do all these primary factors of upset, where do they come from? They actually all come from ignorance. They all come from what we just looked at, avidya, or lack of awareness. And it's on the basis of lack of awareness that we fall into this whole anguished situation of insecurity. And it's living with that insecurity, then of course there is a sense of just not being what we really could be. So it's very often that we have these, you could say, predicaments or situations of self-loathing, self-abasement, sense of inferiority. So you could say it is tied up within that. So yeah, you could say that if we associate self-debasement, sense of inferiority with being, you could say, the basic toxic flavor of ignorance, and ignorance really being source of these factors of upset, then you can say that, yes, they are related. And of course, all the kleshas, they're all related, essentially because they all stem from the great parent, which is ignorance. Yeah. Anyway, we're going to be doing something about that, and that's why we practice meditation. So we're just going to have a few minutes break, and then we'll begin the component, the section on meditation. So don't go away. So I'd just like to say a few things about the, let me just see here. I'd like to have the Buddha with me here. So let's see. How's that? So speaking about meditation, meditation really is where what we've just talked about really becomes something that's workable. One thing is to identify our flaws. And we very often are conscious of our flaws, but then we just sort of stick with that. Before we were talking about how we tend to fixate on negative things. And it's interesting how in modern entertainment, I was just pondering this the other day, going over sort of the available movies on Netflix. And they're entirely just about really horrible things that happen. It's very rare that you actually have anything, apart from then you could say predictably sweet stories, maybe romances and so on. There's so much which really fixates on the rather neurotic aspect of humans. And there is, very often in the modern world, not a sense of really of enlightenment. It's not as if people get together and just talk about it. It's a bit like, of course, the joke about, are we ever going to have a newspaper just with good news? That's not going to happen. It wouldn't sell. And we very often live with a sort of a very acute understanding of negativity as it exists within the human condition, but without really an understanding of also goodness as it lives in the human condition. And this is interesting because, or it's rather sad, because the goodness, clarity, wisdom is really the basic disposition. And we might just end up thinking, gosh, there's nothing but cruelty in this world. There's nothing but the selfish gene, the lowest common denominator rules, etc., etc. And that's where it's important when we're talking about in the Buddhist teaching, when we talk about suffering, we also understand that suffering being caused is not something that's an absolute, and it's something that is removable. And this is what we do with the practice of the path. And so the path is an awareness, being informed and having an idea of where suffering comes from and also why it is removable, understanding that it is essentially conditions. These are dependent conditions that they are dependent. They don't possess any absolute reality. That's why Buddhists are so annoying, because you come and whinge to a Buddhist and they'll always have some sort of constructive answer saying you could do this or you could do that. It's never ever like seen as an absolute problem. But of course, we acknowledge there is problems and we experience problems, but we also see them as workable. And this is basic to the entire project of the Buddhist path. We understand, we're informed about causes and conditions, but in that they are conditioned, they're also workable. And hence, there is a path of working out of this delusional condition. So that's what we do with the study of the path, where we essentially begin to be critical. We begin to analyze and see through our naive assumptions about reality. The Buddha essentially teaches us to understand our conditions and why they're workable. And then on the basis of our own critical thinking, we see how this actually applies to us. This is already a departure from religion, because in religion, as we often have been taught it in terms of a sort of a simple-minded blind faith, then you're not really encouraged to reflect. So of course we might be offended as modern educated people that religions don't encourage you to reflect. But it's interesting to see in the context of Buddhism, where you actually are encouraged to reflect, very often people there are actually perfectly happy to not reflect at all and very happy to just say, okay, Guruji, what should I do? Just tell me what to do and I'll do it, And then the Guru goes on to actually expound on wisdom, Abhidharma, and so on. People are like, oh, You know, this is so boring, and you know, and actually all the Buddha is teaching and what the Guruji is teaching is really just for us to think and become discerning and aware, and actually begin to see what it is that really drives our predicament. And so that's where it doesn't help to just say, hey, just give me the pill and I'll just take it. This is actually where we move beyond this simple-minded blind faith, and we actually begin to have a clear idea of what needs to be done. But what needs to be done, and the locus or the place where this takes place, is our mind. So we can't go on complaining about the outer circumstances. We have to be like the lion that turns around and says, who threw that stone? And that's where it's indispensable to work with the mind, to actually become aware of the psychology of meditation and understand how mind is something that we can work with. We don't need to be stuck with the tyranny of an ignorant, afflicted mind. Mind is something that we can work with, and work with in simplicity. And that's where the practice of meditation is absolutely indispensable for the Buddhist path. Otherwise, we're just stuck with just ideas and stuff. Whereas the moment that we begin to have some grasp of meditation, then there's a simplicity that we can continually relate to in terms of both our confusion and also in terms of what arises in our mind, without necessarily fixating on it. So this is really the key to the you could say the secret of what really rules every experience that we have. And so the practice of meditation is really indispensable on the path to enlightenment. And without enlightenment, then any spiritual approach will really just be temporary patchwork. So that's where the perspective that we're bringing here, and the perspective that is associated with the Buddha, is really that we need to get to the bottom of things. We don't just take refuge in the Buddha because the Buddha is nice and we like the Buddha, but simply because the Buddha is someone who didn't put up with dogma, didn't put up with the ordinary assumptions, culturally constructed, subjectively constructed styles of essentially putting up barriers between ourselves and experience. And that's where the Buddha's gesture of sitting down under the tree in Bodh Gaya, free from any system and completely exposing himself to the power of truth, is really the inspiration that runs through his subsequent discovery of enlightenment, and is then the spirit really that's basic to what we've been doing on the path, us who follow the Buddha and the Buddha's example. So the practice of meditation then has two aspects, and some of you would have heard this before. Shamatha and Vipassana, Shine and Thakdong, the practice of calm abiding, which is the conspicuous aspect of sitting, providing a framework for peace. This might be sitting, it might be walking meditation, but essentially a place where we set some boundaries and we actually allow ourselves to align and connect with reality. So with the practice of shamatha, already there we're beginning to connect with the world. We're not, while we do set some boundaries in terms of our cognitive capacity and in terms of eliminating ignorance, we are actually through this practice aligning ourselves with awareness. So the technique of shamatha is to place the body in a posture that is conducive to to physical well-being, calm. So of course we can sit on the floor if we're disposed to do that, but otherwise we can sit on a chair. But there's very much the sense that sitting is associated with grounding ourselves physically, but also equally psychologically. So we provide this framework of physical peace, and this also really affects our psychological peace. We sit straight, and we additionally also have a posture for the hands on the knees or in our lap. We sit straight with our chin a little bit in, our shoulders a bit back, the jaw relaxed, the gaze lowered. And with this posture, we then sit for a particular amount of time. We set some boundaries in terms of providing a space for ourselves, and also in terms of time. So we might sit, in this case, for example, here, we practice sitting for 15 minutes, then we do mindful walking for 5 minutes, and then again, we sit for 15 minutes. So that's where the first aspect of the body really has to do with grounding ourselves, setting some boundaries physically. The second aspect is the mind, and that's where we come back to the breath. We are aware of the mind and its capacity to go everywhere, to be all over the shop and to be distracted. And this is the first thing as a meditator you discover really is the mind's incapacity, difficulty. The mind has issues with just staying present. And that's why it's very helpful to have the ideal structures of you could say, minimizing distraction and so on. But we do so not from the point of view of wanting to escape the world, but more in terms of just being completely clear with regards to our mind, giving our mind the best conditions to actually reconnect with reality. We don't even have to construct reality. We don't have to have a philosophy about reality. We really just have to be present. And we do so then with the second aspect, which is the practice of mindfulness, grounding ourselves in being fully here. So this is the presence of, or the practice of not being distracted. And that's where we anchor the mind through being aware of an object and sustaining that. So that's where we enable ourselves to discontinue our ordinary condition of distraction, and actually this enables us to be fully present. So this practice of shamatha really is essential in the sense of providing peace in the mind. In the present context, we practice mindfulness through awareness of the breath that exits from our nostrils, and we really make that the object of focus. We are focused, proactively focused as the breath leaves the nostrils, fuses with space, and then as the breath then comes back, we simply just relax. We actually leave a gap, and then again, we're attentive to the out-breath. Gap, out-breath, gap, out-breath. That's how we come back to sustaining this presence, which is very helpful because it is not about us going into trance or anything, but more just that we continually come back and we have something we come back to and relax. Then we also discover how we could be present without necessarily sustaining a reference point. So we alternate between this being proactive in terms of sustaining awareness of the out-breath and then also simply relaxing. In this way, we train ourselves in increasingly being effortless with regards to sustaining this condition of non-distraction. The third aspect is the psychological material. And as we've been looking at in the Abhidharma, then we are ruled by a lot of psychological mental factors. These absorb us. What we're doing with meditation is not creating new mental factors, but rather just not being enveloped or absorbed by these mental factors. They don't constitute distraction. And when we do discover that we have been distracted, we simply just come back to the breath. But whatever arises in terms of our psychological material, in terms of memories, in terms of thoughts and so on, we recognize that this is all taking place within the present. And so we got just aware, and this awareness we can ground in the relationship to the breath, just being aware of the breath as a reference point. But other than that, just being aware that everything that arises in the mind is taking place right now. It has nothing to do with the past. It has nothing to do with the present. It's entirely thoughts. However, they might be manifesting in terms of the material that comes up from essentially our all ground. They might be thoughts about the future. They might be thoughts about the past. They might be thoughts of various kinds. They might be thoughts that are allowed to proliferate to the extent that they become strong emotions. But the more we train in just recognizing that all of this is taking place within the present space, the less grip, the less sort of absolute authority these thoughts have on us. And it's on the basis of essentially puncturing or seeing through the authority of the thoughts that we have then a wider perspective that goes beyond just the thoughts. We're aware of where they're taking place. We acknowledge that they're there, but they don't really constitute an authority. They don't really amount to something that controls us, simply because we're just aware that they're taking place within the space of the present moment. Just like clouds, they take place in the sky, then thoughts take place within the present moment. They have nothing to do, though they don't have any reality about the past. They have no reality about the future. We don't need to construct the now, or we don't need to construct reality. It's already there in the absence of, you could say, the nebulous clouds of our distracted entanglement with our ordinary conceptual mind. So these are the really three aspects that constitute our practice of meditation in terms of posture, in terms of how we focus the mind with mindfulness, and also how we relate to our psychological material. This in itself is meditation, but it's very much helped by creating an atmosphere, which we here do through the practice of Jamgun Miparam, which is treasury of blessings, Buddha sadhana, which is just recollecting the Buddha with a very beautiful devotional liturgy, and also invoking the Buddha through invocation, through mantra, and so on. So of course, this is done in many different ways, in many different contexts. And of course, in the Vajrayana, there's a wide variety of invoking the sacred in terms of visualization and so forth. But it's important to recognize that, again, the visualization is not intended to represent some sort of external savior, but really just intended to invoke the abiding wisdom or manifest quality, the aspects of enlightenment that is innate to this present moment. So it's not just that we settle into and connect with the present moment as some sort of abstract, vacuous condition, but it's very much with an awareness that this condition possesses countless qualities, which are reflected then in the form of, say, the Buddha, or in the memory of deity, or in the memory of great sages and so on. So much of particularly in Tibetan Buddhism, so much of the practices are really preceded by, or very often you could say united with, the practice of the vision or the visualization of the sacred. But that said, pretty much all Buddhist traditions have, you could say, the skillful means of engaging this dualistic mind that thinks in terms of object and so on, where you have, in some traditions, you read sutras prior to meditation, or in some traditions, you bow before a Buddha statue or whatever. All of these are ways really just to connect with this abiding innate disposition. That's kind of all I'd like to say today. And there's still 5 minutes. So this is a rare moment if anybody has any questions about the practice of meditation, then they're very welcome. You can do that here. Otherwise, what I can do is just, I'll switch on the sadhana that we'll be doing. And maybe Okay. Let's see here. Oh. By the way, at the end of the practice, there's a prayer called the Aspiration of Maitreya. It's actually from the Abhidharma Sutra, and it's from the last section of the Abhidharma called the Ganavuya, entering into reality. And it's actually very beautiful. There's so much to be said about that. I always think it would be nice one day to sort of go over a commentary on this. There's so much material in there. And the reason why I include this is because it gives an idea of the vastness and also the profundity of the entire path. And in some way, it's a little bit to create the grounds for sort of aspiring that we might walk the Mahayana path and giving some idea of the content of it. But it very much speaks really of the scope of enlightenment, the nature of reality, and also then the practice of particularly the 6 paramitas. But if there's interest in it, I'd like to maybe go over a commentary that we have. Okay. Yes, please go over a commentary to the Maitreya Aspiration Prayer. Okay. Let's see how we do this, actually, practically speaking. Maybe I'll take out one Monday. I mean, the 5 to 6 period, and go over it. And I don't know if this has been translated, so it might just be me using a Tibetan commentary, so it'll be a little bit slower, but it's not a very long commentary, so it should be doable. Anyway, it's very profound and wonderful. Okay, we'll just take a 2-minute break, if that, and then we'll begin the practice. Thank you. Okay. There's a little line that I often read here where it says in the Samadhi Sutra, right? Now, what that actually means is Buddha nature is always with us. So we could actually maintain a lot of images in our mind, right? But the moment that you maintain the image of the Buddha in your mind, and not just externalizing the Buddha as some wonderful person out there that will save the day, but really from the point of view of this is, you could say, the purity of our mind that has always been with us, which manifests in terms of the Buddha, and we could say the Buddha in this world is someone who manifested enlightenment. The thought of the Buddha actually puts us in a particular place that connects with this disposition. So there's a lot of power in that image. And so it's why we would say whoever thinks of the Buddha practices the meditation of the Bodhisattvas, because there's a connection, not just, we could say, with the absence of thought, which also is there and which provides, you could say, the gateway to Vipassana, but also in terms of the manifest qualities of enlightenment. So that's why we would say this aspect of blessing opens up for something that goes beyond just the, you could say, the conceptual idea of not grasping, and into a felt domain that really connects us with the manifest qualities of enlightenment. So there's a lot of benefit with this practice of recollecting the Buddha. Okay, so we'll begin with refuge in bodhicitta. Oh yeah, one more thing that I'm been banging on about as of late, which is, you know, the line where it says through the merit of practicing generosity and so on. This actually means the paramita vehicle. Generosity and so on is really synonymous with the 6 paramitas. It's just a classical way in Tibet, and also I suppose in India, to just talk and say 6 paramitas. In other ways, saying 6 paramitas, etc. You know, so that's where, you know, you have a group of people and you just refer to, you know, it's like Harry and the mob, you know. Then you know that Harry and the mob means Harry and then Sally and Jane and Thomas, etc., etc. So that's really, so when we talk about here, by the merit of practicing generosity and the mob and the gang, we are talking about the paramita vehicle. So essentially this is also synonymous with the path of liberation, the path of the Mahayana, and so on. So that's where we could say aspire through this practice of the Mahayana that we may attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. Okay. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. May all sentient beings enjoy happiness in the causes of happiness. May they be free from suffering in the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the sacred happiness devoid of suffering. And may they dwell in boundless equanimity that is free from attachment and aversion. Ah, as the union of unborn emptiness and the ceaseless appearances of interdependence, magically there appears before me in the sky, amidst vast clouds of offerings, on a jewel lion throne and lotus sun and moon disk seats, the incomparable teacher, lion of the Shakyas. His body the color of gold, adorned with major and minor marks. Clad in the 3 Dharma robes, he sits in Vajra posture, his right hand gracefully poised in the earth-touching mudra, and his left hand in the gesture of meditation, holding an alms bowl full of nectar. Like a mountain of gold, magnificent he shines in splendor, spreading beams of wisdom light across the whole expanse of space. The 8 close suns, 16 elders and the like, a vast ocean-like retinue of noble beings, encircles him all around. Simply think of him and he grants the glory of the highest bliss, liberation from samsara and nirvana, the 2 extremes. He is the great being, perfect embodiment of every source of refuge. With your great compassion, you embraced this turbulent and degenerate world and made 500 mighty aspirations. You are as exalted as the white lotus. Whoever hears your name shall never return to samsara. Most compassionate teacher, to you I pay homage. All my own and others' virtues are body, speech, and mind, together with all our possessions, visualized like Samantabhadra's offering clouds, I offer to you. All the harmful actions and transgressions I have committed throughout beginningless time, each and every one I now confess with intense and heartfelt regret. In all virtuous actions of the noble ones and ordinary beings accumulated throughout the past, present, and future, I rejoice. Turn the wheel of the profound and vast Dharma teachings ceaselessly and in every direction, I pray. Your wisdom body is like space and remains changeless throughout the past, present, and future. Yet in the perception of those to be guided, you go through the display of birth and death. Even so, let your form body continue always to appear. Through all the virtues I have accumulated in the past, I'm accumulating now and will accumulate in the future. For the sake of benefiting all beings who are as infinite as space, may you, the sovereign of Dharma, be forever pleased, and may all attain the state of the victorious one, the Lord of Dharma. Living beings like us, adrift in this degenerate age, have no guidance, no protection. Because of your kindness caring for us with surpassing compassion, every manifestation in this world now of the three jewels is your enlightened activity. You are then our only refuge, incomparable, supreme. So from our hearts we pray with total confidence and faith. Do not neglect the great promises you made in times gone by, but hold us until we attain enlightenment with your compassion. Supreme Teacher Bhagavan Tathagata Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Supreme Teacher Bhagavan Tathagata Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Supreme Teacher Bhagavan Tathagata Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Te yata o muni muni mahamunaya soha. 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 Om 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 muni muni mahamunaya soha. From the Buddha's body there emanates a great radiance, a multicolored rays of wisdom light, dispelling all our own and others' obscurations and causing all the genuine qualities of the Mahayana path to rise within us, so that we attain the level of from which we will never return again to samsara. The miraculous display of the unsurpassable wisdom appears as the intentions, deeds, prayers, knowledge, love, and ability of all the Sugatas and their children. May all beings become exactly like them. I prostrate to all the Buddhas and to the Bodhisattvas, endowed with the divine eye of the sages, and to the Shravakas as well. I prostrate to Bodhicitta, which counteracts birth in all lower realms and perfectly shows the path to the higher realms and leads to no aging nor death. Whatever negative actions I have done under the influence of an afflicted mind, in the presence of the Buddhas, I fully acknowledge them all. By the accumulation of any merit I have created through the three kinds of activities, may my seed of omniscience grow, and may I attain awakening that never ends. Whatever offerings to the Buddhas that can be found in realms of the 10 directions are known to the Buddhas who rejoice in them. I rejoice in all these offerings. I fully acknowledge all negative actions and rejoice in all merit. I prostrate to all the Buddhas. May I attain supreme primordial wisdom. I earnestly request the Bodhisattvas who reside on the 10 levels in all the direction of the worlds in the 10 directions to awaken into supreme enlightenment. Once you have awakened into genuine enlightenment and tamed the Maras and their hordes, may you turn the wheel of Dharma so that all living beings may be healed. With the sound of the great Dharma drum, may you free all sentient beings who are suffering. Throughout inconceivable millions of kalpas, may you remain and teach the Dharma. Mired in the swamp of desire, entangled in the strands of cyclic existence, I am fettered by all that binds. I supplicate those, supreme among humans, to look upon me. The Buddhas do not blame sentient beings who are flawed. With a loving heart for all sentient beings, may the Buddhas free them from the ocean of cyclic existence. Any perfect Buddhas who are present, those who have passed away and those yet to come, may I train following in their way and engage in enlightened conduct. Having perfected the 6 paramitas, may I liberate the 6 families of sentient beings. Having actualized the 6 extraordinary faculties, may I reach unexcelled enlightenment. Future phenomena not born and those past will not occur. Present phenomena have no inherent nature. There is no actual location. There is no perception. There are no outer things. May I realize the Dharmadhatu of emptiness. According to the Buddhas, the great sages, there is no truly existent sentient beings nor life force. There is no truly existent individual and no nurturing of self. May I realize the Dharmata where the self is not present. An entity such as grasping onto a self in mind is not present within any of the paramitas. To benefit all sentient beings, may I give with generosity free of avarice. Since things do not exist as entities, may my wealth appear spontaneously. Since all things totally disintegrate, may I perfect the paramita of generosity. Endowed with a flawless ethics that is guided by rules, and an ethics that is completely pure, with an ethics free of an arrogant mind, may I perfect the paramita of ethics. Just as the elements of earth, water, fire, and wind, bodhisattvas, do not remain caught by mental constructs. By attaining patience, anger never arises. May I perfect the paramita of patience. Through the power of previous perseverance, and through a strong body and mind, become stable, enthusiastic, and free of laziness. And may I perfect the paramita of perseverance, like through the samadhi of the hero's stride, and through the samadhi that is like a vajra. May I perfect the paramita of meditative concentration. Through actualizing the 3 gates of full liberation, the equal nature of the 3 times, and the 3 types of knowing as well, may I perfect the paramita of prajna. Through persevering in a bodhisattva's practice, may I attain the kaya praised by all the Buddhas, the luminous kaya and the kaya blazing with majesty. Thus may my intention be fulfilled. May I be like the famed Maitreya, who engaged in such a practice, perfected the paramitas, and perfectly abides at the zenith of the 10th level. By this merit, may all attain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may all beings be freed. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. May the Buddha appear in this world, may the light of the teaching shine like the sun, may the holders of the teaching live in harmony, and thus may all be auspicious for the teaching to endure. We pray for the good health of the teachers. We pray for their precious lives to be long. We pray for their activities to spread and increase. May we be blessed never to part from the teachers. Akashasya stiti yavat yavacha jagataha stiti tavan mama stiti bhuyahat jagadukani nignata. Akashasya stiti yavat yavacha jagataha stiti tavan mama stiti bhuyahat jagadukani nignata. Tavan mama stiti bhuyahat jagadukani nignata. Tavan mama stiti bhuyahat jagadukani nignata. As long as space remains, as long as the world remains, may I too remain to alleviate the sufferings of the world. That's it. Thank you very much for joining me here in this study and practice. See you again. All the best wishes.